Good evening. No sound. Hey, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? No. Can you hear me? No. No, turn the PA on. I'm not in charge of the PA. Can you hear me now? Thanks for coming out tonight to our first Science Art Cabaret of the season. We forget, because we just keep doing these, that we started it in October of 2009, so this is the beginning of our 9th year of doing these cabarets. So we're really happy that there's still an audience and people are curious about the crazy things we throw together. And so thank you for all coming out tonight. And in case you're wondering what's coming up with the cabaret, I wanted to mention a few events. Oh, first of all, I know to those of you that come regularly, you're used to coming to the 9th Ward, which is funky and downtown and that, and this is a little bit more of a formal setting. I couldn't get the space for tonight because it's a really busy building, but those of you who do come regularly notice that the chairs are a little more comfortable here. So hopefully that will make up for it. Later in the month, Tuesday, November 27th, this is not on our calendar yet, but we're going to be, it's not really a cabaret event, but the cabaret is collaborating with Coalesce Bio Art Lab at UB to present artist and theorist Simon Penny on his new book, Making Sense, as well as one other speaker who will be dealing with the history of AI and cognition. So that's something that Paul Vanus and I were talking about this week. So that's Tuesday, November 27th, this month. If you notice on my Serve Yourself bar out there, there are some posters for Sam Van Aken, The Tree of Life. That's a single speaker presentation here in the cinema on December 6th. And The Tree of Life is this crazy botany art project that Sam Van Aken, who is a professor at Syracuse University, has done. We showed him a few years ago, and he's actually hybridized fruit to the extent that he has these trees that bear 40 different fruit. And there's a number of them around the country. You can look it up online. And I always wanted Sam to come and talk about that. So he's going to be coming in December to talk about that project. And it's timely because he's also now working, he's a CAI artist in residence at UB. And he's also working with the public art program and Aaron Ott at the Albright to bring a Tree of Life project to Western New York. So if you're at all interested in art, science, botany, or Frankenstein-style vegetation, that'll be really interesting, I guarantee you. And then our next multi-speaker presentation, like tonight, will be February 26th, back in the 9th Ward, and it'll be on the theme of frequencies. And we have some really good speakers lined up for that. So we're a little ahead of ourselves. We're not usually this organized, but things are coming together with Gary Nicard and me. So tonight's cabaret is called Hotspots, and it's done in conjunction with the exhibition Hotspots, Radioactivity in the Landscape, which is curated by Jennie Lamensdorf and Joan Linder up at UB. It's up there right now. You can see it. It's up through December 8th, I believe. It's a really terrific show. Give yourself some time because there's a lot of really great work in that show dealing with radioactivity in the landscape in lots of different ways. And just before we get started tonight, I'm going to have Joan Linder come up and talk about that for a moment and give you some information on that exhibition, if Joan's in the room.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks, John. What I really wanted to do was I just wanted to, number one, thank John and Gary for sort of letting us semi-hijack the Science and Art Cabaret series. I have been working on this show with Jennie for 3 years, and I've never worked on a curatorial project that was this extensive and lasted so long. And it was amazing to kind of talk to her in a gallery about her interest in radioactive waste, which I wound up having looked at Love Canal and sort of delved deep into some of the sites around here. I'd been living here for many years before I realized that there was so much Manhattan Project material right here around us, and we decided to work on this show together, and so it's a real labor of love, and I encourage you to come see it. But also that show, which was so much work, I have to thank, because they're here, Rachel Adams and Bob Scalise for doing so much work on that too. And I don't know, I think Jenny's going to do such a good job talking about the show that I'll leave that to her. But I also wanted to thank all of the speakers for coming, so that's all.
Okay, Jennie Lamensdorf is director and curator of Time Equities, Inc., Art in Buildings. Her work focuses on expanding audiences for the art of our time by bringing challenging and engaging work to non-traditional exhibition spaces. In 2016, Lamensdorf co-founded Forward Union, a coalition building initiative connecting social justice organizations with artists and creative communities. She's a board member of Art Omni in Ghent, New York, and a member of the Nurture Art Advisory Board in Brooklyn, New York. We're really pleased she could come back to Buffalo today to be part of the cabaret, so please welcome Jennie Lamensdorf.
Hi. Okay, I want to say my thank yous. Thank you for having me at Hall Walls. Thank you to Rachel and to Joan for introducing and welcoming me to Buffalo. I think I've been here like 8 or 10 times in the last 3 years, so it's been really fun to get to know Buffalo. And I'm gonna not talk about Buffalo today because I think everyone probably knows a lot more about it than me. My focus of research in this subject matter is the American Southwest. So has anybody here actually seen our show? Yeah? Cool. So this is our show. It's at UB through December 8th. I encourage you to come see it. The exhibition has 18 artists and artist collectives in it, and it's focused on the long-term human and environmental impact of radioactive waste and the nuclear industry, and the fact that the United States does not have a plan of how to store or dispose of this material in a long-term fashion. So how did I, a curator from New York City, get interested in this? I used to live in Austin, Texas, and in 2010 I spent 2 months backcountry camping in the Southwest through a program through Texas Tech University that sort of sells itself as an opportunity to see all the land art from the 60s and 70s, and you definitely get to do that. But you also see sites of industry and epic nature and pre-Columbian sites and water politics, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the sites we visited is here. This is the Laguna Pueblo Reservation, which is like 30 minutes outside of Albuquerque. And from the 50s through the 90s, Laguna Pueblo was home of the Jackpile Mine, which was at the time, or when it was on operation, the world's largest open pit uranium mine. And it's a partially reclaimed mine, so the figures in this picture are looking over the edge of the mine into what is left of it. So it's reclaimed basically just means it was filled in, and so this was filled in like less than all of the way. That's what they mean by partially. And Laguna Pueblo has a number of villages on it. One of them is called Powati, and Powati's right on the edge of the mine. So as the mine grew, the village moved away from the edge. And there's a geologist who's a Laguna, and I was there in 2010, and at the time he was working to get the mine made into a Superfund site. And I'm gonna assume, because this is Buffalo, that everyone knows what a Superfund site is. Is that fair? And so in 2016 he succeeded, and Curtis told these stories of being a child, and they would dynamite in the mine at noon and at 6 p.m. And it would kind of blanket the village of Powati in like this fine yellow caked dust. And if you mixed it with water, it made a great face paint. And the children would paint their faces and play. And Curtis is a human gamma emitter. And in his work to get this made into a Superfund site, he would go to Los Alamos. And when he would go to Los Alamos, he sets off the radiation detectors. And he says, spending a day with Curtis is like smoking a pack of cigarettes. Mm-hmm. And all of this was completely bewildering and fascinating to me. And I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I couldn't stop reading about it. And this obsession kind of like manifested finally in this exhibition that I got to do with Joan. Oh, this is the video, if someone can hit play. So this is a clip from a video that I think helps visualize kind of how we got to where we are today. The basic history is that the nuclear industry started in 1945 with the detonation of the first atomic bomb at the Trinity site in New Mexico, followed shortly thereafter by the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And from then on, all of the detonations have been tests. And this is a work by Sal Hashimoto, who's in our show. All of the stuff I'm going to talk about is in our show. He's a Japanese artist, and this is a visualization of all of the confirmed nuclear bomb detonations from 1945 until 1988. You can see in the upper right-hand corner, 1975. So imagine this is like a video game, right? So these are the players on the board, and if it works, we're going to have this yeah. Okay, you get the idea. This is from peak Cold War, and the blue, that's Nevada, that's the Nevada test site. And the thing that's so striking to me about this video is that everyone is basically just bombing themselves. This is all like this story about national defense and national security, but it's just like the destruction of your own sovereign territory, and then occasionally like your colonies, right? So like France is bombing Algeria, and Britain is bombing the Marshall Islands, and so are we. But this hubris of national security it plays out in the real destruction of these nations' own territories. And the video maps it from 1945 to 1998, and 1998 is an important year in this history because that's the year that the UN approved the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, which has never been ratified because there are 8 nations that are critical to it being relevant that need to sign it, which haven't, the US being one of them. So it's kind of like the way the Korean War never ended. The ban on these tests is ineffectual and kind of not real in a lot of ways. So in Buffalo, this history is very present, but it actually impacts the entire nation. This is a map by Ludovico Sentis, who is an Italian architect who was at UB as a postdoctoral fellow a couple of years ago doing research into the Manhattan Project. And this map is of the way that radioactive material was moved, like clouds of radioactive material were moved by winds across the country. The whole country is implicated in this story, and the magnitude of that is, I think, something that we were trying to get across in the exhibition. So what are we doing about this? This is an image from, I think, 1994, but this is basically the technology that we're still using to store radioactive waste. It's dry casks. This would ultimately be covered in gravel and capped. This is basically what we still do. And it's just a little overwhelming to me. A lot of this is about waiting for someone else to come up with the idea of how to deal with this material and how to protect ourselves from it. We just ignore it. The time spans we're talking about are tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years, and it's unfathomable, and there are things that seem a lot more pressing and a lot more immediate that we should be dealing with. But this is a timeline it's going to run us over. You may have seen this exciting headline, which came out in the Buffalo News right before our exhibition opened. This material is not very well documented where it was, so it pops up from time to time. People find it, it gets lost and then found. This goes back to legacy sites of the Manhattan Project that were not well documented and then kind of continues to the present day. Other scary headlines recently include these from San Diego, which were in August and September. There's a decommissioned nuclear power plant in San Diego that, according to current climate change data, will be underwater before they have successfully come up with a plan to remove the waste from the site. Basically, the material is just stored on site for however it's made. So nuclear power plants, the waste is stored on the site of that plant. Any other industry, it's still kept on site or moved to other places that are these way stations. They're not permanent long-term storage facilities. This was just this week. When Joan and I started this exhibition, we thought we were kind of shedding light on something that was something we felt important, but also kind of niche. And I don't think we could have imagined how relevant it would become, nor do I think we wanted it to feel so relevant at the time of the exhibition actually happening. And so you might be thinking, what about Onkalo? I've heard about Onkalo, which is in Finland. This is a documentary about it. It's available on the internet. I suggest watching it if you haven't seen it. Onkalo is like putting a piece of gum on the Hoover Dam to stop it from overflowing. It was started in the 70s. It won't be finished anytime soon. It will be able to receive waste for maybe 100 years, and then it will need to be kept isolated for 100,000 years, and it can only receive waste from Finland. So what are we doing, right? Like, what's our plan? What's our Onkalo? This is an image of the waste isolation pilot plant in Carlsbad, New Mexico, which is on the Texas-New Mexico border. This photograph is a uranotype, which is an archaic form of photography that kind of predates using silver in the photographic process. Abby Hempner did a project where she drove around and photographed the waste isolation pilot plant, or WIP, and the sites that send their high-level radioactive waste to WIP. And WIP is a long-term storage facility for high-level radioactive waste. It only accepts material from military sites, so no power plants can send their waste there. And it was in the news recently. In 2014, it had an accident. There was an explosion and a release of radioactive material because they mixed the wrong kind of kitty litter into barrels, which the kitty litter, like, kind of domestic kitty litter, what you buy, is used to absorb liquid nuclear waste. They used the wrong kind. They switched to organic, and it caused an explosion. So the facility has just reopened and started taking material again. And all of these sites are physically accessible from the highway. That's sort of intentional in order to be able to bring material to them. But also, Abby wasn't doing any trespassing to get these photographs. She's pulling off the side of the highway. You can see the level of security is like this rickety fence. So just to recap, we have no plan for how to deal with non-military waste. We have a facility for military waste that uses kitty litter, and sometimes they use the wrong kind. So I feel like this lady. This woman actually was a citizen of the area around 3 Mile Island, and 3 Mile Island is infamous, obviously, for its partial meltdown. But it is actually not the worst nuclear accident that happened in this country. The worst happened at Church Rock. Around the same period. Church Rock is on Navajo land, and so it obviously received a lot less attention. It was an earthen dam that was holding up a cooling pond. There was a uranium refinery on the site, and so waste was kept in cooling ponds, and it was not built to the specifications provided by the DOE. And in the late 80s, it bridged its earthen dam, and it flooded the river. And that river was the drinking source not only for the Navajo, but also for Albuquerque and Santa Fe. And nobody was told about this for 4 days. And in those 4 days, people use this water for like fishing and drinking, but also leisure activities and hanging out. And people would enter the water and their legs would be burned. So it was a significant accident of liquid waste and solid waste. And you might also be thinking about the UN terrifying information this week about how if we don't dramatically change the way that we live, by 2040, like critical climate change is going to happen, and the world as we know it will no longer be. And that nuclear power is green energy, and so we should lean into that. And it's true that the nuclear power plants they're not releasing carbon into the atmosphere, but it's important to think about what happens before and after. And the before is the mining and the refining, which is contaminating many landscapes, and they tend to be in places where people don't have the same rights or autonomy. So it used to be in the United States, mostly taking place on Native American land. We no longer mine here, but we receive the majority of our uranium from places in Western Africa. So, and then of course afterwards we have all of this waste, which I've just been talking about for like 15 minutes. So I think that, again, it's this thing where this is a problem that is just so unfathomable, the amount of time, that how do we talk about it when there are more immediate concerns, when we have this looming 2040 date all of a sudden? It needs to be negotiated, and I don't have the language for how to do that, but it's something that through this project I've been trying to find and share and learn from the artists that we've worked with. And that language is critical to this project. So the waste isolation and pilot plant is going to be a contaminated site for 100,000 years. And it is unfathomable to talk 100,000 years into the future. If you think about it, this universal symbol for like toxic, bad, don't drink this, skull and crossbones, actually began as an early Christian symbol of the ascension. So in this much shorter period of time, it has gone 180 degrees, what this symbol means. And Onkolo, it's gonna have to be capped for 100,000 years. And people are curious, and they're gonna wanna see what's there. The pyramids were built to keep people out, and the first thing people did was try to break in and figure out what was inside. So in the early 90s, there was a think tank commissioned by Sandia Labs, and Sandia is much like Los Alamos. They are research labs in the nuclear industry, and it was how to talk to the future, how to say, don't go here, that this place is bad, that nothing good comes from here, stay away. And they had linguists and historians and artists and architects and scientists. And the most famous image from this project is this one, and it has a sister image as well. And it was by Michael Brill, who was an architect on the faculty here at UB. And it's called Spikefield, and it's the iconic image. He actually didn't win the think tank. It's not what will be done at WIP. They're actually just writing "don't go here" in granite in many, many languages. But it has kind of become this iconic image of this landscape universally, not specifically WIP, but like radioactive landscapes. And so how do we live with this, right? Like, the thing that gets me is that if nothing goes wrong again, if there's never another meltdown, if there's never another accident, if no one bombs anyone ever again, like we're going to keep making this material through nuclear power generation and through medical industries and through all these industries that use this material. So we have to figure out how to live with it. And Naomi Babo in our exhibition has created these absolutely gorgeous beaded gas masks for a future in which it is so toxic that you need your gas mask to be super chic. And I think that art can change the world. I think art can change people. I think art can change the world. But art has the capacity to slip past censors, to open conversations, to be a Trojan horse. We're all here in this room because of art. But it's not enough. We need scientists, we need communities, we need politicians to get on board and to make this issue important. And I hope that through art we can sort of contribute to this conversation, but I think it's critical to understand that all of this is speculative and that this is just the tiniest little pebble in the big ocean. And I hope that the exhibition can serve as a didactic tool, especially for the students and other people who may not know too much about this subject matter because it impacts your community so deeply. But it is just the beginning. And yeah, thank you.
Our next speaker is Adelle Henderson. Adele teaches print media at the University at Buffalo Department of Art, serves on the board of directors of the Western New York Book Art Center, and I didn't know this, is co-founder of the Clean Air Coalition of Western New York. She has major awards, including a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship. Her prints and works on paper are in the collection of the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, Albright Knox Art Gallery, National Museum of American Art, New York Public Library, and the Sheldon Memorial Gallery, among others. And we're very pleased that she agreed to be part of our cabaret tonight. So please welcome Adelle Henderson.
Thank you, John.
While Adele's getting set up, I failed to mention that we're live streaming this on our YouTube channel. In case you wanna-
Thanks, John.
In case you want to text your many friends, or else it'll be available on our YouTube channel.
Oh, that's funny. All right, so I'm going to do a big shift here. We're going from the global to the local, and I want to segue into this idea of nuclear waste and poison places and move it to poison places and our neck of the woods, which most of you here are probably familiar with. And I also want to say that this is my story, but it's a much larger story. It's a story that I've been involved with since 2003, when I got involved with activism at the local level. So I'll get there in a minute, but I thought I'd give you a little background first, just about me and kind of where I'm coming from. So I grew up in Nebraska. I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska. It was a very, I spent all my time outdoors. My parents and my family would go to this lake in Nebraska in the middle of the state every weekend, and we would just hang out and ski and sail and do different things like that. So that's a little bit of kind of where I'm coming from. My grandmother, my grandmother on the right was an artist. She grew up in Washington State and went to art school at Columbia in New York City and was a sculptor. And my mother on the left was a painter and a very interesting woman. I spent most of my time when I wasn't at school with horses, and that was my passion for many, many years. Again, mainly outdoor activities, and there we go. So that's me at school and with my horse. And continuing on, I'm going to go through this real quickly. My parents loved to sail, and that was their passion. So whenever they weren't doing what they had to do, they were out there enjoying life. And when I was a kid, growing up in Nebraska, we frequently had tornado sirens going off, and you hit the shelter, and it was terrifying. And I think part of the reason it was so terrifying is because it was uncontrollable, it was unknown. You'd go down and you wouldn't know what was going on. And it was the days before we had the internet, and we had to rely on a little radio, and to compound it, there was The Wizard of Oz, which we would watch can you play the video? I don't know if he hears me. I don't know if I can play this. Hello? Oh, well, it's not that important. You can imagine The Wizard of Oz. You've seen it. Oh, there it goes. Just a short clip. So that was my terror. When I was 7 years old, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, sparked by the Bay of Pigs. And being in Nebraska, this is Lincoln, Nebraska. This is Offutt Air Force Base. Offutt Air Force Base was the central command center for the Strategic Air Command. And we were under the impression that if Cuba did launch the missiles, that they would be aiming for Omaha, Nebraska. So I thought I was gonna die. Everybody thought they were gonna die. It was really scary. I was 7 years old. My father built a fallout shelter, and some pictures from the time. We will bury you. I mean, if you didn't live through that time, it's a little hard to imagine. It was so full of propaganda and images filled. We were glued to the TV for 10 days. And it was just.
What is that picture? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but go back one. What was that picture?
It was.
You said glued to the TV. What is?
This is a nuclear bomb at the beginning of its explosion, just in that first millisecond. This is a bomber that was used for delivering nuclear warheads. And we would frequently see these going over our home in Lincoln. There was also a base in Lincoln, Nebraska that they would use occasionally to keep the Russians guessing, or the Cubans guessing. So, little fun, little propaganda here. This is Nebraska, this is fallout high-risk areas. There's so many maps, and they all have different information. It's you could spend a lot of time studying them. So my father built a fallout shelter in our basement when I was 7 during the crisis, and it looked very much like this. The difference was we had a higher ceiling, so we could do 4 bunks up one wall, and it was stocked with all sorts of things. We had 300 gallons of water, we had X-Lax, we had toilets, we had tons of food and an air machine, and this fellow over on the right here is pumping the air machine. There was a lead door that would be moved in front of the door, and then there was sort of like a little entryway that was built out of cinder block to, I don't know exactly what it was for, to block the radiation or something. I'm not quite sure. And we think about it now, and Dr. Strangelove, if you didn't live through that time, maybe it just seems like a funny movie, but it's not such a funny movie. And then I like this, I changed this slide here to sort of mock how, when there's so many people of our age, anyone who's my age or older went through this, and they all have their own stories, and everybody felt, I think, like they were in danger. And so there's this argument going on about like who was in the most, the scariest place. So I was in Lincoln, Nebraska. So fast forward, I moved to Buffalo, New York, and I chose this slide because it's kind of an interesting bird's eye view of the city when it was just starting in 1901, and the World's Fair is coming, or excuse me, the International Fair. And you can see Niagara Falls, and Love Canal is right there at the edge of, kind of in between Tonawanda and the falls. And when I first moved here, I met my husband Bob Hirsch, and we got married and moved to Riverside, neighborhood of Buffalo. And what we didn't know was how close we were to Tonawanda Coke. And we found out by walking our dogs along the river, which was our favorite place to go. It's just a little bit to the north and east of Riverside. And so we came to call it the stink. And the fumes would come down, and we'd put cloths over our face and so forth and so on. And this is a little map of the river, and this is where we live in Riverside, and this is Tonawanda Coke. And for those of you from around here, you'll probably recognize the map here. And what you're not seeing are all these other industrial sites, which became an obsession for me. Like Jennie is obsessed with all of her research. I got really deep into the research about this area, and it became a bit overwhelming, I must say, just because these are all regulated sites. And what's kind of interesting is they're all regulated sites and they're identified, but I found out the hard way that regulated doesn't mean that they're, it doesn't mean much. Regulated just means they're on a list, and sometimes the people who are regulating them, the companies, are just going and having tea. So, like Tonawanda Coke, they were never really inspected. They always knew when the inspectors were coming, and it was never taken seriously because the DEC didn't pay any attention to them. And it was because the people weren't complaining. And I started asking people I knew about Tonawanda Coke, and they would say, what stink? What are you talking about? Or they say, oh, it's so much better now. It used to be so much worse, because Buffalo was so horrible in the old days, in the 50s and 60s with all of the coal ash and everything like that. So finally I found someone who I could commiserate with at a Lois Gibbs conference. This is a view of Tonawanda Coke right around here, and that's the river. The Huntley plant, which is now shut down. This is a picture of the coke in production. Coke is a coal that is heated to an extremely high temperature so that it becomes very dense, and it's used in the manufacture of other metals, steel. Nobody really knew where the stink was coming from, but I figured it out by driving around and following my nose. And then I started talking to people, and I found someone who understood what I was talking about, and we formed a group with just about 4 other people who, it's the Clean Air Coalition began. This is a picture I found on the internet from Tonawanda Coke, saying no firearms in the plant, and cameras, no cameras, which I really love. So long story short, we got together, we started organizing. We found a guy from California who came in and trained us how to use the bucket. And the bucket is a just a word we use for this container that has a valve on it. It's airtight, and then you connect a Kevlar bag to the valve, and it's approved by the EPA. So you hook up a little, like a hairdryer or something like that to create a vacuum in the bucket, and you create this vacuum. It's kind of like a lung. So you create a vacuum in the bucket, and then when you're ready to take the air sample, you release the valve, and the bag fills up with air. So wherever you are, it takes a sample of the air. So most of the stink would happen at night. So we had a little phone rally thing, and we would call each other and when it got bad, and you know, usually 2 in the morning or something like that. And hey, Jackie, you know, let's go out and get a sample. And sometimes it was in the winter and really cold. So anyhow, we went out many times, and we only got 3 samples, but they were good ones, and the benzene was super high. So then we started having this ugliest man in the world. We started having press conferences and trying to get the information out there, and pointing the finger to Don Crane, the then owner of Tonawanda Coke. He's now deceased. And we got involved with the DEC, and we worked together with them, and it was kind of unusual because at that time the DEC is the Department of Environmental Conservation, and we were working with the local branch. And the local people weren't super helpful, so we ended up working with the state, and they were great, and they brought people out here all the time, and they ended up setting up 4 air monitoring stations, 1 on Grand Island and then 3 around the perimeter of Tonawanda Coke and a little bit further away. And so it seemed like it took forever. This was, oh gosh, I'm not even sure what year it was, but they did all these studies, and it took a year to get the things installed, and it took another year to get the study, and then it took another year to get the results. And I'm going to show you this video. If you could, I don't know if I can start it myself, or if you can start it for me. So this is talking about what we did, and I think it's a good summary instead of me telling you the whole story.
There's things you can smell and identify right away. Burning rubber is one of them. You know, oh, that's rubber. This is not that.
Tar and burning, and it's a burning citrusy smell. I don't even know how to describe it. It smells like poop.
If you could bottle this up and give it to people to smell, they would pay you to take it away.
Everybody said, oh, Tonawanda is a nice place to live. And it is. I mean, they have, you know, a park and little stores and buses that go through or whatever, you know. I didn't know about the plants. I did notice them because they're maybe a mile or 2 away. I've lived in Tonawanda my whole life. I didn't notice the difference until I went out to the West Coast and was sitting in San Diego on the beach and realized, you know, this is clean air. This is different. It didn't take too long before every time it would smell bad, I'd look on the news to see which way the wind was coming from. I would drive around and hunt for the same smell. You know, it was Tonawanda Coke.
This is where the air goes in this bag. It's called a Kevlar bag. You disconnect the bag and you send that off to a laboratory where they analyze the air in the bag.
see anything. I went through MRIs, MRAs.
I ended up going to a lung specialist, and I told her, you know, about the burning sensation and how I've been sick, and I was told I have a tumor in my lower right lung. She goes, first of all, where do you live? I go, in Kenmore. She goes, what street? And I go, Westgate. And she goes, you're by the Tonawanda coal plant. I'm telling you to move. If I go down the street I grew up on, there's maybe a handful of houses that have not had cancer. My son said to me, Mom, why did you stay? I said, what's the point in leaving now? I said, and if I just pick up and leave, who's going to stay and fight?
The smells have not stopped, and people reporting that they have not stopped on Facebook are there on a regular basis. So it's still a problem.
And I really think that the health department should come in and start doing a little bit more. Because there's people that are sick.
With my mom being sick and passing away, and knowing she was in the yard all the time, that she was gardening, that she was always breathing in that air because she was always outside in the summer, did I really want to know that doubt in my head now, what if we never moved here? Would my mom still be here? It's a constant thought.
So I'm going to kind of not go through all of this because, in the sake of time, that video was shot in 2008, since then a lot's happened. A lot of you here are familiar with it. If you're not familiar with it and you're interested, you can find plenty of information online. The big news was they were raided in 2009 by the EPA, and they brought people in from Washington, D.C. and Colorado, and that was also thanks to the efforts of a lot of politicians that we worked with who were putting pressure. Even Cuomo came. They had a huge indictment that resulted in a guilty finding, and then the Tonawanda Coke had to pay $24 million, which is unprecedented, and now they're trying to back out of some of that payment. The environmental manager went to jail for 1 year, which is crazy. That just never happens. So since we started, it's been a 92% reduction in benzene. They're still up to their old tricks. They had a big, this is the piece I had in the show that was included a letter from Don Crane on the right, telling us how he was a good neighbor and he declined to meet with us. And we wrote him many letters, and he always said that he wouldn't meet with us. So we gave him a chance to be a good neighbor, and we even told him we had funding to help him, and he still ignored us. And I'm going to skip that one. Now, this last year, it's been a lot going on in the news. Right now, we're sort of waiting to hear what the judge is going to say, because they've been in trouble again. Their waste heat tunnel where the waste air goes collapsed, and it sent all that horrible air into the air, into the surrounding neighborhood, and so the pressure's on them again. So hopefully the judge will do the right thing and, you know, stick to his guns. And I think that's about it, except for I just want to say that I'm involved with this organization now. It's called Citizen Science Community Resources. And instead of the air bucket test, we're doing soil sampling in toolkits. So if you want to get your soil sampled and find out what's in it, you can rent, we're going to set up these kits in libraries around the area, and you can go check a kit out. And so that's parts free. You'll have to pay for the sampling, which is around $100, but hopefully we'll get some money to pay for the sampling as well. That's our goal. So we're looking for corporate sponsors and so forth to pay for the sampling of the ground. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker tonight is Adam Rome. Adam is an American environmental historian and professor in the Department of History at the University of Buffalo. In his book, Bulldozer in the Countryside, he examines how the post-World War II residential construction boom and its resulting urban sprawl contributed to the rise of the modern environmental movement. He is a recipient of the Organization of American Historians Distinguished Lecturer Award in 2014, the Lewis Mumford Prize given by the Society for American City and Regional Planning History for the best book on American planning history in 2003, and the Frederick Jackson Turner Award given by the Organization of American Historians for the best first book on any topic in American history in 2002. Please welcome Adam Rome.
I'm not only not an artist, but in the past, people have said I'm audio-visually impaired. So I have just words, but words have power too. And I wanted to start by describing a short story by the science fiction writer Robert Heinlein. And it appeared in 1940 under a pseudonym. He wasn't famous yet. And what's his most famous book? Strangers in a Strange Land. So 1940, before the United States is involved in World War II, before nuclear power, before the nuclear bomb was being developed. But this story, and it appeared in a magazine called Astounding Science Fiction, is called Blow-Ups Happen. And it imagines a time in the future. I can't remember exactly how far into the future, probably around our time, maybe even earlier than our time, in which all of the United States is powered by one gargantuan atomic power plant. All of our energy comes from this one plant. And the plant is familiarly known simply as the bomb. And they know that if they mismanage the plant, if they screw up in any way, that the plant might explode. And this would be an explosion on a scale that we couldn't even imagine. So everyone that works in the plant, if you can just kind of imagine air traffic controllers times 100, the stress that if they make a mistake, the whole country might be destroyed, maybe even the world. So they're constantly under this intense stress, and the management is worried that they'll break down. They'll have a nervous breakdown under the pressure of day after day after day, feeling this overwhelming weight of responsibility. So everyone that works in the plant is assigned a psychologist who follows them around all the time to see if they're showing any signs of cracking under the pressure. And the main character in this story is one of these psychologists. But being a psychologist in this circumstance is just as stressful as being the plant manager. So So, because if he misses the sign that the guy is cracking or the woman is cracking, and they make a mistake, it's on them. So, this one psychologist begins himself to break down under the pressure, and he's relieved of duty, but he won't leave the plant. He's obsessed with the plant, and he starts hanging out in the library and studying more about the operation of the plant, and discovers a flaw that even if the plant is run correctly, in quotes, that something could go wrong, that because of design problem that would have catastrophic implications. And he goes and tells his boss, and he tells other people, and of course their first response basically is, well, you're crazy. I mean, literally, that's why we've taken you off the job. You're cracking up under pressure, so why can we believe you? But eventually he does convince somebody to look into it, and it turns out he's right. And they have to shut the plant down, and that's itself a calamity. But they are able to fix the problem, and life goes on. And what intrigued me about this story when I first heard about it, blow-ups happen, was that it, even though nuclear power didn't exist and nuclear weapons didn't exist, that Heinlein was already recognizing that, first of all, these are twinned. That after World War II, we developed the bomb, and then we because the bomb is so scary and so destructive, we try to find some way to turn the sword into a plowshare, to make the destructive, scary thing something that we can hopefully cheer about and find makes our lives better, and that's supposedly atomic power. Atoms for peace. So he's already envisioning how this twinned power that could either be incredibly destructive or potentially driving civilization in good ways. They're inseparable. And there's actually an older history going back to when people first understood radiation, which isn't really that long ago. It's only the beginning of the 20th century that the first radioactive element, radium, was discovered. And people didn't really understand what radiation was. And some of the first people to think about it seriously thought this might even be the fulfillment of a long-standing dream in Western civilization, of being able to turn elements, one element into another. That people had always dreamed of turning lead into gold. And radiation appeared to do that radioactive materials are constantly changing and maybe they're, in the phrase of the time, transmuting into a different kind of material. And so one of the discoverers of radium, one of the first great scientists of radiation was a British guy named Frederick Soddy, and he knew that this was not just a curiosity, that in some way this spoke to fundamental realities of the dawning modern age, the scientific age, the industrial age. And so he wrote a couple of books about radiation and radium. And in one, a piece that he wrote, I don't think this was a book, in 1903, he says, "Our planet is a storehouse stuffed with explosives, inconceivably more power than any we know of, and possibly only awaiting a suitable detonator to cause the Earth to revert to chaos." So that's one vision of what radiation is. I mean, I'll just read it again. "Our planet is a storehouse stuffed with explosives, inconceivably more powerful than any we know of, and possibly only awaiting a suitable detonator to cause the Earth to revert to chaos." So he already understands that the ability ultimately to break apart atoms can release a kind of energy that's far, far beyond anything that humans had ever comprehended before. So he's aware of this incredibly destructive potential. But then 5 years later, in 1908, he writes a book that's simply called The Interpretation of Radium, which I love that title. What does radium mean? How do we make sense of it? How is it going to change our world? And by then, he's come to realize that there's a different side, too. So he writes there, a race which could transmute matter would have little need to earn its bread by the sweat of its brow. Such a race could transform a desert continent, thaw its frozen poles, and make the whole world one smiling Garden of Eden. And again, let me just read that again, because it's so, one sentence, this sums up so much that Westerners had hoped for generations. A race which could transmute matter would have little need to earn its bread by the sweat of the brow. We never need to work again. We wouldn't need slaves. We wouldn't need toil. We wouldn't need any of the bad things. Such a race could transform a desert continent, thaw its frozen poles, and make the whole world one smiling Garden of Eden. And again, this dream maybe isn't as old as the alchemist dream of turning lead into gold, but people had certainly been dreaming for about a century at this point that starting with the steam engine, that we could release kinds of energy that would allow us to complete the conquest of the earth. And that was the dream of a lot of people in the 19th century, to make the earth perfect for us. That there were a lot of things in nature that people hated, and with unlimited energy at our disposal, we could get rid of all the parts of nature we didn't like and turn nature into this wonderfully tame, perfect, smiling Garden of Eden. So that's the dream that after World War II becomes energy too cheap to meter, unlimited, safe energy. And again, I think this is so important that long before any of this is a reality, you've got the scientists thinking, on the one hand, on the other hand. On the one hand, doom. On the other hand, paradise. On the one hand, elixirs of life. On the other, rays of death. And which is it going to be? Well, actually, the whole point is we don't get to choose. That if we want and this is really about science, not just about radiation, that we want the good things that science can bring, but we're scared to death of all the problems that seemingly inevitably come from scientific discoveries. That all of our miracles also turn out to be, many of them at least, tied to nightmares. And so how do we respond to that? So one reaction, I'm going to say more about this in a moment, but actually plays off the title of that Robert Heinlein story, Blow Ups Happen. The great countercultural cartoonist R. Crumb read that story, and so he's the guy that makes shit happens into a household phrase. So I'll come back to shit happens in a moment, because that's a phrase that we don't think about enough, what it means and what it can tell us. But one reaction to this twinned, great, awful force that is modern science, and that modern radiation being one part of that, was probably the best single statement of it is from a pioneer in the automotive industry, Charles Kettering. This I don't know exactly when he said this, but I think it was in the 30s. The price of progress is trouble, and I don't think the price is too high. And a lot of us have believed that more than we realize. Yeah, we know there are going to be problems, but we're willing to accept that because the good things that we get are worth it. But But actually, it's much more complicated than that, because Charles Kettering wasn't really thinking, so who pays the price, and who gets the benefit. Before you can ever get to, and one meaning of the shit happens is a kind of acquiescence, that it almost sounds like maturity. That's what life is recognizing, it's not all a bowl of cherries. You have to take the bad with the good. But how do you get to that point of acquiescence, if that's a desirable point? Another meaning of shit happens can be a warning. Shit happens. You better be prepared. But how can you be prepared for dangers that you don't know about? How can you be prepared for dangers that have been maybe deliberately kept secret, that people aren't willing to acknowledge? And in some ways, that's been the heart both of the story of the military and of industry, that especially during the height of the Cold War, we often said essentially the price of national security is some problems that we're not telling you about ahead of time, and we may not even tell you about when they happen. But even if they do become public, you'll just accept that because we're in this death struggle with the Soviet Union. And industry too often touted only the marvels, and certainly never bragged about the pollution and the toxic waste and the health consequences both for people and for ecosystems, and often denied it when they became public. But the lesson that I draw out of it, and I didn't know that I was going to be following an activist in the program, but activism is crucial. You can't make an informed decision to accept a risk if you don't know that there's a risk, if you don't know the potential hazards. And you also can't, that's true as an individual, but as a society it's even more complicated because who's making the decision? It's easy for Charles Kettering to say, the price of progress is trouble, and that's a price I'm willing to pay, because actually Charles Kettering probably didn't pay very much of the price. A lot of other people do. And the burdens are unequally distributed. And the same was true with the military. Everything having to do with both the nuclear power complex and the nuclear warfare complex, disproportionate burdens on some people, far fewer burdens on others. It's not totally simple, but as a generalization, you can say that that's true. But I did, and I had actually, I'd started on a project once where I was going to be writing about all the various ways in which the military affects the environment in the United States since World War II. And it's astonishing. I mean, the radiation part of it is only one piece. It's a particularly awful piece, but the military has more Superfund sites than anybody. And if you then add the private industry contractors who were making things for the military, it's an astonishing percentage of all the most contaminated sites. But there are so many other ways in which a military preparedness has shaped the landscape for worse. But what I discovered when I found out, when I began to look into this, is that even in the height of the Cold War, and especially since the Cold War is over, there always have been people that have questioned the seemingly unquestionable idea that whatever price we have to pay for national security is worth it. Just as there have always been people who have questioned the idea that the price of prosperity is pollution. And one incredibly powerful example comes, and I think it's tied to the one of the many super powerful parts of the Hotspots exhibit, which if you haven't seen, you really should, is the detonations. And even for me, I know all about the history of all the testing of weapons, but I actually see, and it's quite large and it makes a quite large noise, the images of the explosions going off was striking. But before 1963, we tested weapons, and so did the Soviets, and so did the British, above ground. And so we were, and that led to, by the late 1950s, a phenomenon that went overnight from being something that only a handful of people knew about to virtually every educated person, every reader, let's say, of the New Yorker, fallout. That the testing of weapons in Nevada was creating radioactive rain, essentially, hundreds and thousands of miles away. And milk in Wisconsin was contaminated because the cows out in the fields that now irradiated, that accumulated. And it quickly gave rise to a whole genre of science fiction, of gargantuan ants and sea creatures and other things that had absorbed radiation. But it also led to protests, and they were really a pioneering kind of protest because they involved scientists, one of whom became probably the most famous environmentalist of the time, Barry Commoner, who at the time was at Washington University in St. Louis. But he also worked with an activist group of women, and they collected, their most attention-getting project was to collect baby teeth that were then examined for radioactivity. And by the early 1960s, this had led to a nationwide organization, several actually, 3 or 4 groups. One was of doctors, there was one of scientists, but there was also one called Women Strike for Peace. And they literally did have one day initially when they wouldn't do anything. They wouldn't make dinner, they wouldn't take the kids anywhere, they wouldn't sleep with their husbands, and to dramatize the risk to future generations of allowing continued explosions of nuclear weapons all across the globe. And in 1963, even in the height of the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union agreed that they're not going to test weapons above ground again, and they don't. They still do underground, so they haven't solved the problem completely. But there are other examples. The one other one, and I lived through this. I was a journalist for a while before I got my PhD, a journalist in Wichita, Kansas in the mid-'80s and late '80s. And one of the big issues at the time, the United States wanted to build this massive new kind of missile called the MX. And in order to do that, and they were really worried that the Soviet missiles had become so accurate and so powerful that even our so-called super hardened silos, where our nuclear missiles were all across the Great Plains, would be vulnerable to a Soviet surprise attack, that they wouldn't survive if they were targeted. So this MX, the missile itself was gargantuan, but it was also, as originally proposed, going to be in this, I don't remember the exact dimensions, but let's say 400 mile by 400 mile complex underneath the ground in Nevada of super highways, so that they could constantly be getting moved around over thousands of miles of underground highway that would also have zillions of holes for them to shoot out of if necessary. And this was during the Reagan administration. Even Reagan's former campaign manager, who was then a senator from Nevada, said, wait a minute, we're not having it's bad enough that you used to test weapons above ground and you still do below ground, but we're not having basically the entire state become a construction site for this vast underground complex. And it drew together, again, an incredible array of people. There were tribes that sacred areas were going to be affected. There were ranchers, otherwise conservative rural folk. There were scientists. There were all kinds of activists. And And they stopped the MX. We still made a new missile, but we totally changed the way that we were going to base it. Again, the Reagan years, just as the Kennedy years of the early 60s, were a time of incredible height and tension between the U.S. and the Soviets. But even in that time, when people found out about it, when people had to actually had the opportunity to have a debate, do we really need this? Is this actually necessary for national security? In the same way that we've also had similar debates about whether things are actually necessary for our industrial prosperity. Are there other ways to do things? It's true, you can't completely escape problems, but you end up having a lot fewer of them if you have people actively discussing the risks and weighing the risks, and if that debate's truly inclusive and democratic. If you have to listen to all the voices, then we end up making far fewer arbitrary and risky and dangerous decisions. So that's one lesson that I draw out of history. We've got this twofold force that we have to live with, as we just said, because we derive so many benefits from it. But it's also potentially incredibly destructive and hazardous. How do we manage that risk? How do we try to minimize the hazards and the destructiveness? I think it involves activism and democracy on a scale that we're constantly trying to build and empower people to take part in these decisions, to force these discussions. And that's where I take heart, even standing amidst the often gloomy images of the way we have failed so far in some cases. So that's my story. Thanks.
Thank you, Adam. Our next speaker is Michael Beam. I was very happy that Michael agreed to speak, because I had asked him to speak about something very specific that I knew he would be enthusiastic about, and I'm enthusiastic about it too. And I think you can see, if you haven't been to a cabaret before, this is sort of how it goes. We don't know exactly what people are going to say, but things weave together through the course of the event. Michael is an artist and a curator, and as an artist, his work can be found in public and private collections in Texas, Massachusetts, Illinois, California, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, New York, Washington, D.C. His work also resides in private collections across the Buffalo, Niagara, and Western New York region. His comprehensive studio website is forthcoming. I shouldn't have read that line. I should have taken that out. He's currently the curator of exhibitions and collections at the Castellani Art Museum of Niagara University. And please welcome Michael Beam.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you, thank you. I will try to keep it to 20 minutes. I'm going to use my timer. I could talk for 5 hours on this. For every slide I'm going to show, and 10 more that I took out, because I was paranoid everybody would rebel. Let me set this. Nice. All right. Everyone is familiar with, and thank you, John, for having me. Thank you very much. It was good timing, too, to present this. I don't really want the microphone. I'm just going to talk. All right. Do I need that? Everyone's familiar with Art Park. Is that correct? I'm going to go with that assumption. Are there any reporters here tonight? Okay, good. Well, this is what we're going to talk about Art Park, but more specifically, I kind of have to jump forward to see what I'm going to talk about, because I can't see my little list of what's coming up, and I forget what order I put things in, so just bear with me. I'm going to talk about, we're going to talk about Art Park, but most specifically, we're going to talk about Antfarm's time capsule at Art Park that was buried in 1975. Okay, and I'm a little bit of a kind of a compulsive person. If I get an idea or a project that I want to do or see or see through. I have to see things through. I'm gonna fix it, get it done, move on. This is a project that has plagued me for a number of years through not being completed. Nothing to see here. Antfarm's time capsule. So we're going to talk a little bit about Antfarm. I'm just going to introduce them if you're not familiar with Antfarm. And we're going to talk about, this whole thing's set up like a timeline too. So we're going to talk about 1972 to 1975. Everyone's familiar with Antfarm, probably their work, their artistic mission. And they're mostly well known for things like Cadillac Ranch. These are the Antfarm founders, Doug Michaels, Chip Lord, and Curtis. And this is back in, you can read the caption. What was it, 68? And then this is more recently. And Chip Lord is still with us. Doug Michaels passed away a number of years ago. But I'm going to chronicle my work at trying to get Antfarm, or get the time capsule to be completed. And I'm going to go kind of fast through the slides, and if I talk too fast or say something that doesn't make sense, please let me know. This is, of course, this is Cadillac Ranch today. Much different. They're also known for multimedia pieces like Media Burn, which was 1975 protest against the 3 channels that dominate the information world. Now we have, 40 channels. There's always 2 sides, right? There's PBS too, but there's always 2 sides. Everything's 2 sides. Back in 75, they were worried about 3 channels. Now we have a lot more. So this was a performance piece where they rammed a rocket cart through televisions protesting TV's control over us, right? And by the way, I grew up near 3 Mile Island, so that was interesting to hear. I remember my parents telling me that Abbie Hoffman protested there. And I think that was one of his last times he had protested, I think, if that's correct or not. My mom loved it. She was like, yeah, Abbie Hoffman was here. My dad's a Marine. He didn't like it. But I always remember, it was just always there. You didn't talk about it. It just smoked. We thought it smoked. We didn't realize it was steam. And every day, just always saw that. So I had completely forgot about that. To get to know Antfarm a little more and what they're about, this is a fantastic book because I'm still interested in the Citizen's Time Capsule, but I want to know more about Antfarm. So I started learning everything they did, who they are, what their mission was, and where they were going and where they came from. So this is a great book if you're interested in Auto America. And again, you can read the caption. I won't read it to you. It's a great book. I recommend it. But mostly what Antfarm is known for and what I am most interested in are their time capsules, which I think are phenomenal. We all make time capsules. We all kind of have that little, things, even if we find something years later. When I use a dictionary or I use a reference, I always kind of put a date next to the word I look up. I don't know why, I work in a museum, but the dates and remembering and looking back to when you first saw something, it's rediscovering something. It's putting something away for the future, and then when you're in the future, it's in the past what you find. I don't know if that makes sense, but I just think they're fascinating. And then this time capsule was one of the first ones they did in 1972, and it was called Time Capsule, and it was just a refrigerator. It was at the Houston Contemporary Art Museum in Texas, and it was filled with what you'd expect in a refrigerator. There was food, there was a little bit of clothing, there was some water, because what they were doing is preserving a time capsule of the day, so in the future people could come back and examine it and be wowed at the marvels of primitives, right? And they had beer, some marijuana, clothing, video footage, and when I say video footage, it was reel to reel, and that's an advertisement for the piece down there of everything that was in it. And this is kind of a close-up, and this is what they did was everyone who participated got a patch, like a military patch. That Antfarm time capsule was a patch. And the only thing that survived after they reopened it, they had a big party, they opened the door, and they didn't expect everything to survive, but the one thing that was totally untouched was a 6-pack of Lone Star Texas beer, which I thought was kind of interesting. When Birchfield Penny did a lecture a number of 5, 6, 8 years ago, when Chip Lord was here, they have a photo of what it looked like when they opened it, but he couldn't get it to me. He couldn't find it, and I didn't have one, and that's why it says Birchfield Penny ? Because they didn't send me the picture. Another time capsule was, in all seriousness, had to do with environmentalism, and it was a aerosol arsenal, and it was a collection of aerosol cans that all had, what did they have in them? The chlorofluorocarbons, which it was decided they were toxic, they were bad, and now then they were kind of outlawed, taken away, not kind of, but outlawed, taken away. And so what they wanted to do was a time capsule, these deadly chemicals, right? They created this sort of circular refrigeration sort of unit that was like a giant spray can, and it would close. And then what they were going to do is open it years later and, again, marvel at the primitive stuff we used and how we were dangerous to ourselves. It didn't survive. It actually burnt up in a studio fire in 1978, which is interesting. Yeah. And so 1975, Antfarm decided, actually September 7th, 1975, Citizens Time Capsule was proposed, and it was begun on that day at Art Park. Of course, if you know the history of Art Park and the amazing things they did in the late 70s, early 80s, and artists they work with, it was an amazing time. And at the time that they were doing this, they weren't as renowned as, of course, they are now. They were sort of starting out. And again, imagine what it's like for someone like him, who is probably in his 30s, to put this in the ground, and then he's getting through his career. He's, professor emeritus, all this, blah, blah, blah. And then to go back, 30 years later to dig this out and look back on your life, not only your life, but the community's life, which I'll get into a little bit more. Am I good on time? All right. The Antfarm time capsule was, I'll go back. It was a piece that was done at Art Park, and what it was an automobile, which we'll take a look at, that was filled with suitcases of memorabilia, and everyone from the community was invited. The Lewiston, Niagara Falls, Youngstown, Buffalo, mostly folks from up that area. They were all invited to participate and put something in the time capsule, right? And this is 1975. This is a photo of everybody posing before they filled the car. And the suitcases were filled with everything. And it's really interesting if you think about it. I mean, one had like medicines, right? Magazines. They went to the store and bought all the magazines on the rack that day. And when my daughter was born, I did the same thing. The day she was born, I went to the store right down the street and I bought all the magazines, and they're in a box at home with like a date that says 2024 when she's 16, I think. So it's weird how art imitates life, life imitates art. So there's all kinds of stuff. There's military items. There's a case of liquor, right? There's a 15-year-old bottle of scotch that was buried in 1975. Now it's about 65 years old. Medicine, all kinds of cigarettes, before the warnings, and this will kill you, and all kinds of things that were 1975 buried. Each piece was accompanied by a document, the donor's name and the object, and message to the future. These are all housed at Birchfield Penny Buff State Archives. And then what they did was they collected everything together, and they took the car that was donated, Oldsmobile, and it was filled up, the oil was drained, the battery was decharged. I don't know what that means, but the battery was decharged, and the whole car was coated in tar as a preservative, right? Because it was impervious to water. Did anybody participate in this here? Okay. And then what they did was, and I'll get a little closer to the location, they buried it in the side of a hill, and finished coating it with tar. And this is the study of the proposal of the car, sliding it in, and it's literally kind of like, and when you see where it is, you have sat on this a lot of times at Art Park if you've been there. And there is no plaque. There was a big thing I was trying to find out. Where's the plaque? Well, was there a plaque? Was it taken away? Was it hidden, right? What's the story? What's the story? And Chip Lord doesn't remember if there's a plaque. But as far back as I know, as I've been researching, no one knows of a plaque that was made or existed. So it's sort of put in the ground, and it was supposed to be forgotten about. The point was, it was not supposed to be celebrated as this is here, because they said, oh, we'll be back in 25 years and we'll just dig it up. No problem. We put it in the ground, we'll dig it up. And so they never thought that it would become they don't want it to be a site where somebody had referenced the pyramids, right? They don't want somebody sneaking in and taking stuff out of it, right? This is a picture of them right before they started burying it, Chip Lord and Doug Michaels. And I'm going to go faster. This is just some more pictures. And actually, these are included in a book that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And then after it's finished, and you can see the soil here. This is fill soil, okay? This is a hillside that was ultimately filled and refilled and moved around over time. So it wasn't like virgin soil from the 1950s or something like that. It had been moved around and reflattened and stuff like that. These are photographs after they finished the car, covered in plastic, of course, and then covered it in a galvanized metal, sort of like what farm barns are covered with. And then they just covered it up, planted the grass. Here's one of their Photoshop stuff, like cut and paste. This is where the car is. And this over here is what was called the L. And we'll look at that a little more. Okay. So, in 1999, the idea was that they were, it's 1999, we got to get ready to dig it up next year in 2000. And so they contacted Art Park. At the time, when Art Park was Art Park, it was not the Art Park 501c3. It was run by the New York State Parks Association. So it was a national park. Art Park was just on the property, as it is today. Art Park is on the property of the National New York State Park Service, right? So they don't own or oversee anything in, under, between the ground or anything like that. So they wanted to dig it up. And what happened? Wait a minute, what's that say? Yeah, they declined. I don't know why the Environmental Transportation Association had anything to do with it, but they declined. They said, you can't do it. No, we just can't do it. Move along. Why can't we do it? No, we just can't do it. And this is before my time. So it didn't happen. So in 2003, that's when I started at the Castellani Art Museum. And I remember, first day of work, you come in, you sit down, and there's this big stack of stuff. And you spend the first week just go rifling through all these projects that are in process, haven't happened, might happen. And I thought, wow, this time capsule is great. Oh, it's right in our backyard. So I thought, well, let's do it. Let's, dig it up. Again, I had just moved here from the Midwest via Philadelphia, via Pittsburgh. So I knew about being an aerospace 1950s history buff. I knew about the Manhattan Project, but I was like, it's an ominous thing. It was a project, and I didn't associate with what was here. I don't know why I'm telling you that. But in 2003, I started that, right? And in 2003, the director of Art Park, I said, I want to dig this up. Oh, we tried that. We can't. The bosses won't let us. Well, aren't you the boss? No, I'm not the boss. And I started asking some questions, saying, can we do it? Blah, blah, blah. Nope, nothing to see. No, we can't do it. No. And I just got no's. And I was new, so I said, all right, I'll let it go for a while. So in 2009, 2010, in 2009, in preparation for the 2010 exhibit at UB, organized by Sandra Furman, the Art Park 1974 to 84 exhibition that she organized, and the book she wrote, I decided to try again. And the research that she did for this book, was very helpful to me. Some things I've had previously, some other things I had weren't used for it, so I saved it. And of course, in 2003, 2004, 2005, I got so frustrated with it, with no one calling me back, I threw it in my time capsule box that I keep next to my desk. So when it's full, it's on my notes. I just tape it up, put the date on it, and file it away. Like your archives. And so many times I've thrown it in there, and then I've gone back into deep storage to find it, dig it out, and eventually I lost it. But I started again. So Art Park, all these artists, yay, awesome, amazing artists. Antfarm was one of the first ones in the history of some of the amazing things that they did with local, national, international artists. If you don't have this book, I recommend getting it. As part of the UB Art Gallery exhibition, similar to what's happening tonight with UB Art Gallery exhibition, there was a lecture at Birchfield Penny, and Chip Lord spoke. He talked about the Citizens Time Capsule, the burial, and that's when he and I first met, and we started saying, we got to get this to happen. Oh, I know people who will sponsor it. He said, well, I'm trying this, that, and we started trying it some more and contacting people, but it's a very political situation because you have to kind of, you want to do it and you want to make it happen and you can see it happen, but there's certain people in positions that don't want it to happen and don't want to talk about why they don't want it to happen. I don't know how else to say that. So, but one, to not give up in 2014, I think that was the first time I finally got the state to do, they can't dig it up. Well, the ground's questionable, it's dangerous, blah, blah, blah. Finally got them to do soil samples. And I didn't know when they were going to do it. I wanted to run out and just see what they were doing. And at that time, I didn't know exactly where the car was early on. I knew it was there somewhere, but I didn't know. But anyway, the soil samples. And so I was like, all right, well, good, you're going to do them. And I thought I'd get to go and just see. Oh, we did them. Well, what happened? You know, is it good? Is it bad? Well, we don't know yet. We'll know for 6 months. So 6 months, and then 7 months, and then that guy left. Then it got transferred to this woman, and this woman, you know, and it was just the runaround, right? And then they said, well, the soil samples are something, I don't know, I have a document, questionable. We can't proceed. Don't call us back. They didn't say don't call us back, but when they don't return your calls, okay. So in 2015. In 2014, there was a documentary. This is awesome because I'm trying to find a way to make people want to take this out. I'm like, why are people fighting this? I mean, I understand, we all know the history of what's under our park and then what's under that and what's under that and what's under that, and it goes all the way down to the Native American, maybe, burial grounds. And but there's we're not allowed to talk about that really. But in 2014, there was an amazing documentary made. It was called Game Over. It was all about the Atari ET game that they came out with, and it was such a terrible game that there's this urban legend that they took millions of these games before they sold it and they buried it out west somewhere. Just buried it. It was a urban legend at the time. It was an urban legend, but it turns out to be true. In Alamogordo, New Mexico, they buried all these games. They snuck out there. They made it. They actually made things in America then, and these games were made in America. And they buried them in the ground, right? In this dump. That if you know how dumps work, you know, this year you put stuff here, next year here, next year here, you backfill. You know, you can work your way through it, right? So the whole documentary was about the gentleman who ran the dump, and it was folks who wanted to dig up the idea was, let's see if the games are there. Let's just see, why not? And but they had huge problems there because when they started digging, it turns out there were what's called the mercury pigs. Buried in that same, a lot of military waste, a lot of other things. I don't know if you're familiar with the military mercury pigs incident. I know, okay. So I'm going to go a few minutes over. Is that okay? Yeah. You sure? All right. Companies used to use mercury on seeds to preserve them. So as a company was, this is in the same town, as seeds are being processed and come down the little shaker thing that gets out all the junk and just has seeds, they were mixed with mercury because mercury was a preservative and it would keep the moisture out. And so they used the same line to process feed for the animals, right? So one day they would do the seed processing where they would powder mercury in, and then they would wash out, sweep it off, and then the next day they would process feed for the cattle and the pigs. And what happened was they mixed up the days, and they wound up processing food with mercury in it. And then they shut down the factory and said, don't anybody use this. We can't, it's bad stuff in it. It's poisonous. We don't know what it is, but it's bad. And they were supposed to burn it, throw it all away. It turns out a lot of the workers there took the food home, because they're like, well, I'm not wasting this food. I'm going to feed my pigs and my chickens. And they didn't know that mercury was bad at the time, because no one told them, right? And so this gentleman took home this feed, fed it to his hogs, and they killed the pig for Christmas, and he fed it to his whole family. And 8, 9, 10 teenage kids, and it blinded them all. It killed most of them. There's one of the daughters that are still alive who's blinded instantly. And all of a sudden that became this huge, like, what is going on in this town with toxic pigs, mercury pigs? And what happened was, within a perimeter of so many hundreds of miles, I think, or thousands, they took all the animals and buried them here all at once, just the next day. Took everything and buried it, because they didn't know no one knew what it was. And so anyway, so these folks, to find these Ataris, they had to do test digs, right? And I'm getting too into Atari, but I'm so into this now, because the gentleman who owned the dump, not the property but the dump, he was in charge of it. He went through documents to find out what kind of years back and where things were, and he ran into all kinds of resistance, couldn't do it. There's military waste, the government wouldn't let him, so they finally found out where the pigs were not. And so they were allowed to do test sites in other places. Anyway, the end result is it's all true. They buried the Atari games. And in April of 2014, they dug them all up. Now, the reason I'm talking about this so much is because I see a parallel between this and Art Park. There's no mercury pigs. It's not 20 acres of trash. It's literally 10 feet by 10 feet. But it's in a similar situation. The town, the games that were unearthed were sold. And from 2014 to I think 2016, they raised $107,000. Now these games don't necessarily work. Some are broken, some are pristine. They would go upwards of $1,500. And the gentleman who owned the dump only took the money to reimburse himself for the costs to do this stuff. The rest of it was given to the town. So I was, Art Park, hey, look, if we dig this thing up, we might be able to sell the stuff, and the money can come back to you. So I try to use this as a model for it, but it's all true, which is amazing. It's all true. And I had an hour-long conversation with this guy. He called me back. And I said, yeah, I'm Michael Beebe. Yeah, I work in a museum. I'm in Niagara Falls. I can't tell you what I'm calling about. He's like, yeah, I already checked you out. And it was very, very interesting guy who knew a lot of stuff. There's not a lot of people around like that who know as much as that person and as careful as they were. So in 2016, we decided we're going to figure out exactly where. This is Tanis Winslow, Director of Visual Arts at Art Park. And she's posing right where the actual, we think, the car is right here. Let me get another picture. I'm almost done. Here's the car, here's the L, here's what used to be the L, and here's probably where the car is. This is my piece of paper saying, watch the documentary, maybe get some money. So again, tried to pursue it a little bit, and we were told no, calls weren't returned back. The problem was I didn't work at Art Park, so the political thing was I couldn't stir up too much because I didn't work there. I work at a sort of a sister institution, so it's not where I can't rattle the cage that much, sort of, because it's a disservice to my fellow art folks, right? And I mean, and once you get all the way down that way, it's hard to come back. This is where it is right here. It's right here in the hill. We figured it out within 30 feet by 30 feet where it is, right? This is no longer here. This is here now too, which is weird because that's 1979 when that was originally done. Tanis just redid it last year, so it's kind of serendipitous. So following the Birchfield Penny lecture, Chip Lord's, said, well, I said, well, you really can't. And no one from Art Park would call them back. They wouldn't respond. They wouldn't respond to letters, wouldn't respond to calls. So he said, what can we do? And I said, well, I don't know, get some important people to want to do it. So there was a coordinated effort to get publicity out there a little bit, to try to get some national attention in the art world, to try maybe to get them some things going. And there was a great article on ArtNet News about the project, and oh, is it ever going to happen? Oh, who knows, buried for 40 years. There's another, I know I'm a little long. I had some cool quotes in here, but basically what I was saying was the project's only half finished. It's buried, but the other half is digging it out within our lifetime. So that was something we tried to push in these different, not we, they tried to push these articles in national magazines about getting it out there. And in accordance with that, there was also an exhibition in Red Hook, Brooklyn that focused on their time capsules. Again, we tried to pursue the ability to get it out, and some people just asked, no, don't talk about it anymore, don't ask us. Our idea was to get it out for this exhibit, which it didn't happen. So instead of the car, they used a picture. And again, it's not that I'm not trying, but you can't necessarily go around people. And the other issue is, there's a serious issue of soil there, contamination maybe. I'm not a scientist, but no one wants to talk about it. No one wants to do anything. And I was told in a recent meeting that I was told one thing, that basically it was, if we did soil samples, and I said, well, wait, you guys did soil samples 10 years ago. Well, I don't know anything about that. If we did soil samples and they found something, they would have to shut down our park immediately. And how would you like to be the guy who shuts down our park? So it's a struggle. And in 2018, thank you, John Massier, I'm almost done, I know. When he called me a month ago and said, 2 months ago, will you talk about Antfarm? Yeah, I'd love to, yeah. And so I started pursuing it again, following up with the people saying, what can we possibly do? So then I had two great ideas. One was, here's the car. This is my amazing cut and paste. So let's dig down into the car, the roof of the car, go through the roof, send a camera down there, right? Because I had just bought one of these at like a flea market, and I was with my daughter, and seriously, we were with my daughter, and we were looking in chipmunk holes, right? And but it was just innocent, right? Because what are they doing? And then I was like, oh my God, I can put this down the car, And so, boom, and then John called, so this was a no. No, they wouldn't even hear about it, they wouldn't talk about it, no. This, or no, not that. That was a no, yeah, a no. So I thought, well, geez, if we can't get the car out, there's gotta be something we can do, because every step I take forward, you can't get anywhere without a shitstorm of, as we use the word shit, a shitstorm of trouble. And again, it would be disrespectful to the folks that work there, maybe the community, maybe all you who sit on the concert and watch, Culture Club and, Neil Dolph Lundgren and all that. So I thought, what can we do? There's got to be something. Radar. Holy, yeah. So at least we can do that. And I coined this is my last try, folks, on the high tower. Please just let me do this and I'll go away. Let me just do this and I'll go away. Really, I want to know exactly where it is. That's my real goal, and how deep it is. Don't tell anybody. But so I thought, let's do radar. So I started calling companies. I got this car buried. I can't tell you where. Blah blah blah. No calls back. $5,000, $8,000. I'm almost done. So finally, I called a college. I called Buff State. Actually, I called UB, which sent me to Buff State. And I finally spoke to Dr. Two professors there, Dr. Anselmi and Kevin Williams, who were in the earth sciences and anthropology departments. Hey, I got this thing. I can't really tell you what it is, but it's buried, and I want to just get pictures of it. Okay, we're interested. So eventually what happened was we talked about, they actually have a student integrated learning program where they go out and do this, mostly graveyards, historic sites, and they said, I can't tell you all of it because the state hasn't said I can talk to you about it, and blah, 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 blah. And so the ground penetrating radar I thought would be real sexy. It would just like show you exactly the car, 3D animation, and she said, no, it's gonna look more like this or like this. But at least you'll know where it is, right? Like dirt, car, dirt. So I thought, well, that's better than nothing, right? At least we can make T-shirts or something. But seriously, my goal is to really know where it is, right? Because I've thought about, I live out that way now, going out there with somebody told me they wanted to go out there with a poker. You just poke around. But that you're immediately arrested by the, you're not allowed to dig in the soil. You're not even allowed to stick your finger in the dirt. It's illegal at our park. So, and they were serious. They're like, Mike, no, no, it really is. And so I thought, well, let's do this, right? And so, still nothing to see here, right? So Antfarm 75, 2000. 2000 is coming away. 2003 is coming on. 2010, 16, 18. This looks like everybody else's lecture at the end. It just keeps going, keep going. But what I just found out was that we got approved from the state Department of Environment to do radar searching for the car. We just got it like a week ago. So yeah, so as you can see, I'm smoothing over all the toxic and negative stuff because it does me no favor to go that direction because I want to keep it positive. So I'm not stupid to that stuff. But in order to make this happen, I have to keep it in a positive, right, sense to make this piece happen. So we got approved, but there'll be 2 state officials there watching. No one's allowed to dig. Everyone had to send credentials to the state. Everyone had, the plan, the line, how many people will be there, exactly what equipment, everything. But we got approved. Oh, this is like 15 years. We're doing that. So everybody will get a T-shirt. But that's where we're at. So this is just sorry it took so long. This is a really, it could have been much longer, trust me. It's a project that's not finished, and it deserves to be finished. But imagine the kind of glory and restored energy that our park could get from this. But the other edge of the sword, the good and the bad, that's great. But what if there's something bad, which chances are good. Do you want to be the guy who closes down Art Park, Youngstown? So So it's a balance. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time. And the other thing they made me promise was I could not tell you when we're doing it. I have to keep it a secret. But it's exciting that that's happening. But thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
All right, we conclude tonight with the burning question, how many bananas is a transatlantic flight? I don't know if that's rhetorical or not. We're going to find out.
No, it is not.
It is not. Sal Rappaccio is Associate Professor and Director of Undergraduate Studies in the Physics Department at the University of Buffalo. He's a recipient of the CMS LHC Physics Center Distinguished Researcher Award in 2015. And as part of the CMS collaboration, the High Energy and Particle Physics Prize from the European Physical Society in 2013. And he's handing out bananas. Please welcome Sal Rappaccio.
All right. So, thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation. And as usual, these are always great, and I love coming. I'm also the bad guy tonight, so I'm not usually in this position. You're also probably not in this position. How many Democrats are out there today? All right, don't forget, vote on November 6th, Republicans. Vote on November 9th, so don't. So, all right, so what you're not used to doing if you're a Democrat is saying, going up in front of a panel of scientists and saying, no, I'm that scientist. That day is today. Nuclear power is not going to kill you. Nuclear weapons will definitely kill you. We will definitely not be talking about nuclear weapons I am a member of the Union of Concerned Scientists, you know, the people who keep the doomsday clock, how close we are to all nuclear destruction of like one giant fireball or one tweet away from, you know, everything going boom. I'm part of that organization. That's bad. We're not going to talk about that. We are going to talk about nuclear power, however, which is actually really, really, really good. So first I want to talk to you about what radiation actually is. So I confess, I went to the Hotspots exhibit today. I wanted to see the artwork, and it was great. I enjoyed it a lot. It was very well curated, and what I did see was this overarching fear of a sense of sort of worry, I would say. So I'm going to try to become the back of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Don't panic. So I want to tell you a lot about radiation today. I work at the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva, Switzerland. My research is right there. This is France, and this is Switzerland. That's like Geneva right there. So I was just in Budapest last week. We were talking about this. We have, you know, a room full of, you know, 300 people who are all professionally smashing atoms together. So I do this, you know, for a living. So I'm going to tell you all about how what radiation is. So radiation is basically, sounds terrifying, but it's actually very, very benign. It's basically just particles moving through space. For example, the one that you're probably don't know that you're familiar with, but mostly photons. So photons are light and pretty much every other kind of electromagnetic radiation. They're all the same particle, which is a photon, with just different energies. You know, this is a slowly moving photon, and there's a quickly moving photon, but they're all actually moving the same speed. So they actually just have different energies because of Einstein's theory of relativity. But basically, different photons will have different wavelengths. So they'll be just moving up and down like this, or moving down very, very quickly. And so microwaves, which is what you actually, you know, cook your food with, is about, you know, have wavelengths that are about a few centimeters. You can actually use a microwave to measure the speed of light if you have some marshmallow s'mores and a ruler, which is actually kind of fun. This is actually also where basically your cell phones transmit, so don't panic because you're all in the green zone there. So this is all the safe parts of radiation. It isn't going to hurt you. Why? It's not ionizing. If it's not ionizing, it does not have enough energy to kick out electrons out of nuclei, out of atoms, and it has basically no really damaging biological effects. Unless, of course, you put yourself in a microwave. That probably will not be advised. However, there are some, if the light is energetic enough, you know, light that you can actually see is right here. You're actually giving off wavelengths, you know, right around here, right now, in the infrared. So you are a radiator. Every single thing is radiating on the planet. So you're giving off radiation right now. But it's the safe radiation. It's the, you know, the nice radiation. It's the radiation when you go out to the sun and get a tan and, you know, with sunscreen, because you don't want to get to these kinds of radiation, to the dangerous ones, with the ultraviolet and higher, okay? Ultraviolet radiation is really bad. It will cause cancer and skin cancer, and so, you know, put on that sunscreen and really make sure that you can enjoy the sun, you know, the nice part of the radiation spectrum, which is over here, as much as possible. This is all of like art, is because of this one, right? All the things that you can actually see or maybe hear and, you know, smell or whatever. But, all right, and then there's the really bad ones like X-rays and gamma rays, and these things will, you know, these will kill you. I mean, really, they'll kill you. So this is all the dangerous stuff. So now, they won't kill you right away, and it's really a question of how much radiation exposure you get over how much time and how far away you are. Now, this is why you can go to the dentist and say, I'm going to get an X-ray, and they take a, you know, deadly radiation, and they shove it into your face to check and make sure you don't have any cavities. But it's actually totally fine because there's not enough radiation to cause you damage. So yes, go get your mammograms, go get your X-rays, go do all the things that you need. See chest scans, don't have a heart attack. You're much more likely to die of a heart attack than you are of radiation, so just accept that. And then there's gamma rays, which is actually the super duper energetic ones that are really the products of radioactive decay, or what I do in particle physics collisions. So we get gamma rays all the time. There are other kinds of radiation, and there's different, you know, actual particles that are not force carriers, such as positrons, which are like an electron, but they're emitted from a nucleus after it undergoes a radioactive decay, which occurs via the weak interaction. There's also other ones you probably heard from high school, from like neutrons and alpha particles, which are really just helium nuclei that are just helium atoms stripped of their electrons, and they get ejected from nuclei, and here's the transmutation. Ta-da! Transmutation. So you can in fact change lead into gold. No problem. It's actually not even all that hard. It's just really, really, really takes a long time, and you're only going to get a few molecules out of the deal. So it's like a nanocarat. I don't think it's really worth it. But and then, of course, there's also other radiation that is coming from everywhere else in space. So just in case you're wondering, aside from this nice little gem on Earth, everywhere on the entire universe is pretty much trying to kill you. So just be thankful that we're sitting on such a nice little green water-based thing with lots of vegetation and oxygen-breathing life. That's all good. The rest of the universe is trying to kill you. There's all sorts of stuff that's flying through space. A lot of this is actually remnants from the Big Bang, or shortly after the Big Bang, at the a few 100,000 years later, which is called the cosmic microwave background radiation. This is actually primordial light that's coming from pretty much the earliest image you can take in the universe. But these particles are flying through space through us all the time. What's usually happening is they struck the upper atmosphere and then they decay into a shower of a bunch of other particles that are just, it's just radiation. I'm not going to sugar-coated at all. You're getting radiated. What you're really getting a lot of is these so-called muon particles, and they're actually just like electrons except heavier. They're coming through your head now, and now, and now, and now, and now. It's about 1 per second per head for all of your life. We're also being sprayed like a wash. We are awash in neutrinos from the sun. Okay, they interact with nothing, almost nothing. Very, very rarely they will interact, and you can actually detect them. It turns out you could actually use your eyes to detect them if they were, if you were in a really, really dark place and you waited a really, really, really long time, because they would actually interact with the liquid that's in your eye. And then, of course, we have dark matter. And in case anybody was wondering, has anybody gotten any decent grade on anything where they got a 4%? No. I just gave a midterm. Nobody got a 4%, okay? That was great. We only understand about 4% of the constituents of the entire universe, and the rest is either dark matter or dark energy. You are awash in dark matter as well. So, but don't panic. It's also just radiation that's definitely not interacting with you in any way. All right. So, there is dangerous radiation. There's very dangerous radiation. Okay, right? So if you have an alpha particle, a beta particle, an X-ray, a gamma ray, or a neutron, and you have enough of them, they will kill you. And if you're standing next to a nuclear explosion, it will kill you. However, if you have only a few of them, probably won't kill you. And there's a very simple way to protect against pretty much all radiation, and that's about to hide behind a meter of concrete or dirt. Our detector, or our collision, our actual accelerator, collides particles and makes radiation on purpose so we can study a lot of things. And all of these things get produced, and way more than this, and way more energetic. These are like the kindergarten level of what we actually get to, and we're at way higher energies and way more radiation. And basically, they can't pass through certain materials. And so really, neutrons are kind of the worst because they will pass through a good portion of everything. I mean, alpha particles won't get through your eyelashes. You can blow them away practically. Beta particles will go through paper but not through wood. X-rays will go through wood but not through lead. And then gamma rays, same deal. Neutrons will go right through the lead if it's really thin, and so you kind of get this much dirt, and you're pretty much safe. I've been doing this for 20 some odd years, and still here. Everything's fine. So now, I want you to panic by the end of the day. A lot, but nothing whatsoever about nuclear power. This is a quote from Kurt Vonnegut. Humans have now all but destroyed this once salubrious planet. Don't forget, everywhere else is trying to kill you. as a life-supporting system in fewer than 200 years, mainly by making thermodynamic whoopee with fossil fuels. This is bad. How bad is it? You ask. How bad is it? Okay, great. This is a problem set that I actually just give to my students this week for computational physics. This is the concentration of atmospheric CO2 at the Mauna Loa Observatory, and this is the year. And so this is sort of when they started taking data. You can see some seasonal variations, and you can see this trend that starts to grow, and starts to grow, and starts to grow, and starts to grow. My students' problem sets for the week is to calculate, by extrapolating this date out, this way, when the CO2 concentration will become toxic to, actually not just human life, all oxygen-breathing life at 50 parts per million. That actually is very easy to calculate, so my undergraduates can do this. All life stops around the year 3700. So if you're worried about communicating with people 10,000 or 20,000 years from now, how the nuclear power is going to be, don't worry, everybody's going to be dead. We're all going to die. So we're not going to live that long if we don't solve this particular problem. Panicked yet? Woo! Oh, but don't worry. We're probably going to die way faster than that. And why? Because we keep making thermodynamic whoopee. And this past Thursday, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issued a dire warning. I mean dire. We are going to see catastrophic climate change in terms of, rising sea levels, more catastrophic hurricanes, and all these kinds of events. Drought, at the same time of burning fires in California. Pretty much everything south of the Mason-Dixon line is going to be on fire. Good news, though. Buffalo is actually going to be in great shape. We're going to be like, people are going to be like the snowbirds, but they're going to be like reverse snowbirds because it's going to be like on fire, or like Buffalo. We're going to be like kind of like Virginia temperature right now. So buy property. Just tell it. All right, we need to stop making thermodynamic whoopee. It has to happen. There is no question about it. Civilization depends on this. Trust me. All right, so there's options. There's wind, there's solar, there's nuclear, there's geothermal, and there's other ones that are probably too rare to even worry about. And basically, these are ways to make energy without making whoopee. Except my pointer's nowhere. Okay, so what I want you to now go back to is how much radiation we're willing to tolerate as human beings. So this is a radiation dose chart from Randall Munroe, who runs the XKCD comic. And this is a nice, easy way for you to understand how much radiation you are getting. So if I look up the smallest version up here, if you're sleeping next to your spouse, you get about 0.05 microsieverts. So your spouse is, of course, trying to kill you. But that's not with this. They're probably trying to kill you for other reasons. So a sievert is the amount of radiation that you're actually getting in your biological material. So you are currently getting 1 banana worth of radiation. Thank you. Very well. Well done. That's about 0.1 microsieverts, but nobody knows what a sievert is. I was in the car on the way over, and my wife was like, "What the hell's a sievert?" It's like a sievert. Well, it's a complicated unit with all sorts of dimensions and stuff. But it's complicated, and I'm not going to want to do that. So we're going to use 1 banana as a radiation unit. And this is actually something that's pretty useful. It's called the banana equivalent dose. So I'm going to tell you about what is happening and how much bananas you're going to need to consume in order to get the equivalent radiation dose. Any airline, anyone, pilots, all right, well done. You're getting 400 bananas every time you cross the Atlantic or go across in any direction, just basically that kind of space. It's the equivalent of eating 400 bananas of radiation. All right. Now, all right. I took a transatlantic flight last week twice, so I had 800 bananas over the week, and then I also had Hungarian goulash, which was really, really yummy. But this is also, I'm not worried. I'm not worried at all. Why am I not worried? All right. Before I tell you why I'm not worried, I'm also not worried particularly about getting any extra radiation from Fukushima, and neither are my friends in Tokyo. And I have lots of friends in Tokyo. The extra dose in Tokyo they're getting due to the Fukushima incident is about the same as 1 transatlantic flight. So they're getting about 400 bananas of radiation from Fukushima. Now, you may say, well, that's a lot of bananas. You may be great, but your body is actually producing 10 times that much just naturally anyway. So you're actually just radiating, and you're trying to, radiate yourself. So I don't know. It must say something about our species or something, but So now, if you actually were in the Fukushima exclusion zone for 2 weeks, you would have about 10,000 bananas of radiation. And that is equivalent to about 25 transatlantic flights. Anybody take 25 transatlantic flights in a year? I'm kind of close. Okay. So I get about the same amount as of someone in Fukushima exclusion zone, but that's not actually what I do for work. This is actually just flying around. I mean, this is just, entertainment. And your typical yearly dose is about 4 times that much. Just yours, not just mine. Okay, so that's about 40,000 bananas, or 100 transatlantic flights. And that's just from typical sources like getting your dental x-ray, your mammogram, your x-ray for chest x-rays, all these kinds of things. Actually going through it used to be the case that you got a little bit of radiation when you went through security going to the airport. But this is actually basically what you typically get anyway. Radiation in your basement, from the fire extinguishers or the fire alarms, all these kinds of things. And that's about 100 transatlantic flights. And if you were currently in the Chernobyl grounds, you would get about 150 transatlantic flights for 1 hour. All right. So, I wouldn't vacation there, but you're not going to die if you actually go to Chernobyl. You can walk around and hang around there and do whatever you need. But, don't stay there for too long. But if you had a CT scan, that's about a little bit longer, a little bit higher than that. So if you were like, I would never go to do that, maybe you probably already have. So you probably got about 70,000 bananas if you've ever had a chest CT scan. Okay, this is not to say don't get the chest CT scan. You're going to die of the heart attack. Trust me, that's way worse than the radiation. Now, why is that? Because the safe dose for radiation workers like me, who actually work with radioactive material, is about 500,000 bananas. Okay, right? So keep going down, keep going down, keep going down. We're really in this. This is the number of bananas we need, right, in order to be considered in the safe version of just normal work. No adverse effects whatsoever. It's I actually have to do my safety training at Fermilab pretty often. Getting this amount of radiation in a year is about equivalent to canoeing for 8 minutes, eating 2 teaspoons of peanut butter, or I think driving a car for about 10 minutes. That's about the equivalent risk to your life. I ate peanut butter this morning. I drove for the car for 40 minutes plus whatever, 20 minutes to get here. And so, I've already way outseeded my risk capacity for anything that I'm getting radioactive-wise. And that's because the lowest yearly dose to any increased cancer risk whatsoever, and we've been studying this for an extensively long period of time. This is one of the most studied medical situations that has ever existed. Heart disease, cancer, and from radiation and other kinds of cancer. We study the heck out of this. And this is really the lowest documented dose, is 1 million bananas. I can't eat 1 million bananas. It's also 2,500 transatlantic flights. That's a lot. At some point, you can't do this because it would take you longer to get across the Atlantic, and you couldn't do this in a year anyway, so this is a nonsensical unit at this point. Maybe you could eat 1 million bananas, but you'd probably just, it would just kill you from the weight of so many damn bananas. All right, so now, the Fukushima incident actually had 2 plant workers that were exposed to about 1.8 million bananas. All right, so that's 4,500 transatlantic flights, and it's about 80% higher than the lowest possible cancer risk. For that reason, we actually have emergency workers. They're allowed to have 1.4 Fukushimas, or 2.5 million bananas, and we just accept the fact that some of the emergency workers are going to have a slightly elevated risk of cancer. And that's because we like to save people's lives. And they sign up for this, and thank you for any people who are doing this. This is your yearly dose limit, okay? All right, so now this is the amount of radiation you need if you're gonna die. Okay, like today, if you get this all in one shot, you have to have 80 million bananas. You have to be exposed to 32 separate Fukushimas all in one day. 200,000 transatlantic flights, and which is 133 times the normal background radiation you're getting in a year. Okay, so this will kill you instantaneously. Well, pretty much instantaneously. Okay, so this is the level of where we are. Okay, this is this is a lot of radiation. Okay, so be afraid of this much. Don't be afraid of this much, or even this much. It's what you're getting anyway. Your whole life you've been exposed to this. You had no idea what was happening. Okay, so there's a small amount of increased radiation that's happening from other sources, but it's pretty minimal. And it's pretty much most of the things that you're already doing, and things that are even just completely natural, like the bananas that I've insidiously made you snack on to have this happen. But now, there is two very valid questions. There is waste and there is meltdown. And what do we do with each one of these things? Okay, waste, it's nasty. It's very bad, and if you consume it, you're gonna die. Okay? It's also along for a really long time. So we have two options. One is you encase it in glass and you bury it and wait until it stops being radioactive. We did have actually a perfect place to store this, and it's called the Yucca Mountain. And this was actually studied extensively in order to solve our nuclear waste removal problem. But in 2011, it was actually stopped because of NIMBY. Nobody wants it in their backyard, even if it's not actually their backyard. It's like in their state, or like, you know, there is not a lot of people in Yucca Mountain. It's extremely geologically safe. It was chosen for its dryness. It's near a lot of salt. Accumulates, you know, absorbs a lot of moisture. However, have I got a deal for you? If I told you that we could build plants that would actually utilize all of this existing waste, what would you say? Yes, please. Yes, please. Great news! We have them. They're called Gen 4 nuclear plants. There are actually several different kinds. There's one that's called a fast burner, which uses an existing byproducts as fuel. There's also thorium reactors, which use closed cycles, uses isotopes that are not even usable for nuclear weapons, so there is no proliferation possibility. And it has no transuranic, oops, I don't know why that, transuranic? Maybe these are cis-transuranic elements. I'm kidding, I'm sorry. So there's no transuranic elements that actually occur from these. All right, so these are actually super safe. Also, meltdown is impossible. If things start to go awry, it shuts off instantaneously, intrinsically. It cannot exist without the power that it's actually getting from its own generation. It just turns off. So if a tsunami happens, the thorium is over there. Oh. Why? Thorium's not really all that radioactive. Great. All good things. The byproducts of Gen 4 nuclear plants are in the hundreds of years. So, yay, all of us will get to see them go away before we all die from carbon dioxide poisoning. Yay. So, this is actually what I would vastly suggest. We need to build Gen 4 nuclear power plants. And we need to build them in a hurry. Why? We're all going to die. So, you may have read this article in Forbes. This is an article called How Deadly is Your Kilowatt? So what you can actually measure, and this is what's been done, you can measure the mortality rate of your energy sources in deaths per trillion kilowatt hours. You know what a kilowatt is? You know, 1 watt is, or 100 watts is what comes out of your light bulb, you know, well, the old incandescent versions. And that would be running 1 light bulb for an hour, and, you know, you buy your electricity in, you know, kilowatt hours. 1 trillion kilowatt hour will power the entire planet for about 2.7 days. And these are the number of people that are going to die because of the increased risk of all the bad things that occur with the various versions of power generation. The big bad is coal. Coal is killing us all. Okay, coal is bad. It is also 41% of the global electricity, mainly in China and in the US, 32%. We're burning the crap out of this thing. It is causing ginormous amounts of air pollution, and it needs to stop, like, immediately. The other great ideas are solar and wind. However, you do have a fairly large risk of solar rooftop death, mostly from falling off roofs. You'd be shocked. You'd be shocked how many people are just, this is it. If you're gonna install power on your roof, there's a certain number of people that are gonna die. It's about 440 people for every 2.7 days. Surprisingly large. All right. Wind will also cause a smaller number of deaths, and same thing. Construction. Hydro is actually really, really dangerous. Super dangerous. It does provide a relatively large amount of global electricity. Unlike wind and solar, who are at the 1 and less than 1 and 2% levels, wind and solar are not solving our problems. Okay. Why? There's nothing there. There's just not enough of them. Hydro, on the other hand, does supply a large amount of global electricity. However, it's actually pretty damn dangerous. There was one incident in China where a dam collapse due to a tsunami killed 140,000 people. 140,000. One event. And so that's driving a lot of this number. In the US, it's only about 5. Luckily, we live near Niagara Falls, and we get to use this. We're part of this 6% of US energy consumption users. And so, use that. We're taking advantage of that. All right, moment of truth. Who thinks nuclear power kills this many? All integrated total. Construction, uranium mining, all increased cancer risk, falling off roofs when you're installing everything. Tell me to stop when you think it's gonna be nuclear's turn. Here, solar, 440, wind, hydro. All right, wind, somewhere around wind and hydro, 104. We got 1,400. All right, it's here it is, including Chernobyl and Fukushima. The nuclear global average is 90. In the U.S., including all of our things that have happened in the U.S. through my island, etc., it's 0.1. Nobody's died from nuclear power just yet. Well, per year. Nuclear power is statistically, by far, by a large fraction, by orders of magnitude, safer than anything else we have. No questions down, hands down. The data speaks for itself. Now, the other problem is, okay, yes, there's lots of problems, and we need to solve them all immediately. we're all out of time. But the problem is, we really want to get rid of the thermodynamic whoopee, but we need to be able to actually keep the lights on. And that's called the capacity factor. The capacity factor is how often can you get power in order to make the lights go on. Now, we can actually generate a ton of power. Lots and lots and lots of power. We can't store any of it. How many people have a laptop battery? That's pretty much all the energy you can store throughout the entire day. Okay, that's like in your phone and your laptop. That's it. That's pretty much the extent of the power storage options we have. So we have to we have to generate the electricity the instant we want it, right then. Right now, there is a turbine that is running either in Niagara Falls or in some power plant that is running these light bulbs right this second. So, you want to keep the lights on, you need to keep the options up. So you need a high capacity factor. Nuclear, 92% capacity factor. It's almost always on, almost never off. Geothermal, which is actually a fantastic idea, it's really safe, no byproducts, all things are great. It does require a large amount of open space, so it does not come with zero economic cost. Nothing does, but this is actually a great option, but it's still not as high a capacity factor as nuclear. Hydro and wind are pretty bad. Well, luckily, hydro is great if you're near Niagara Falls, but not everybody lives near Niagara Falls. Wind and solar are not very high because the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. You're out of luck. If you're going to rely on solar, you're only getting half of your energy needs at best because, half the day it's dark. And then wind, it's not all that windy to generate power. Now, there are some other options, of course. The next one with a very large capacity factor is burning biomass and wood. What does that mean? You plant something, you burn it. This sounds like a terrible idea. However, if you actually capture all of that, this can reduce the CO2 concentration on the planet. And so actually this IPCC report discusses some biomass strategies actually to get rid of CO2 in the atmosphere by demolishing huge amounts of area, planting stuff, taking it, burning it for fuel, and capturing the carbon and putting it into blocks and just like burying it underground as far as we possibly can, like just get it down there, okay? This is actually not science fiction. We're close to this, very close to this, okay? Then of course, the capacity factors of coal are very high. Landfill, you could just burn landfill. That's actually literally a dumpster fire. You just light it on fire. That's actually got a really high capacity factor, but this is terrible. This is thermodynamic whoopee, right? I mean, this is just exacerbating the problem. And then of course, there's Trump's favorite, natural gas, petroleum liquids, and coal. More thermodynamic whoopee. However, all right, so basically the bottom line is we need things to keep the lights on, we need to keep the energy, the energy flowing, and we need to do it without consuming any carbon dioxide, or not producing any, rather. So in the future, there is a possibility of the ideal power source. Okay, this is actually what got me interested in physics. If you actually have a nuclear fusion reaction, you fuse nuclei together, and what you get out is basically helium, gas, energy, and that's it. So there's no waste. This is the ideal case, right? This is the golden halo, whatever. What was the word again? In one of the older talks, the shining city on the hill, etc. This is it, nuclear fusion. We're close. To be fair, we've been close for 20 years, but there's something called the inter-reactor example of a tokamak generator. These are plasma fusion generators that will hopefully one day be able to do this. We don't have time to wait. So, what I want you to do right this second is take out your phone and get this piece of this little QR code. You can actually today, right this second, stop carbon emission in your house right now. Grab your phone, go to IDT Energy or whatever provider you want, click the green energy option, and you can get it. I have it. We've had it for a while. My wife and I were arguing it last night. We're like, oh man, it's hot. We should turn on the air conditioner. Oh man, that's so bad for the environment. Wait a minute. I got the carbon free. Dude, turn on the air conditioner. I'm freezing. Let's freeze ourselves out of the joint. I don't care. They're just burning, I just got solar power or something. Who cares? It's all CO2 neutral. Zero. No guilt. Everybody got it? Did it work? Sorry? Human energy. Burning people? or running. No. Ride your bike to work. Yeah. Yeah, take your bike to work. Like, that's a great idea.
No, I mean, like, do humans give off enough carbon dioxide that it's not beneficial that we're harvesting human energy from working out?
I don't. So actually, if there are these little energy monitors. If you're working out there, it's pretty much enough that if like all of you and your friends got together, you could almost power a light bulb.
Here's a question: if so, human bodies are constantly giving off radiation.
Yes.
Right. Like we're getting radiation and we're giving it off.
It's mostly heat.
Radiation?
No. Well, no.
Is this like a detoxifying element?
No. Nope. No detoxing happening at all. We're getting light from outside.
What is the beneficial part of radiation? Why does it exist?
Well, the sun gives off radiation like light, so we exist because
is
this.
radiation actually the reason why there is light?
Yes, light is radiation. That's exactly what it is. So you're getting power from the sun, which creates photosynthesis from plants, and we eat plants and other things that eat plants, and we can all live because of radiation. There is no other way to do this. It is the driving factor for all of life and power. All right, I will warn you, this option is about, so I looked up last night, it's about 8 cents per kilowatt hour. It's about 12% higher cost than the natural gas options you're gonna be given by your power company. I like that, that's okay. guilt-free. Capitalism works. Just go there, buy it, and you don't have to worry about Trump doing whatever the hell he's gonna do. Okay? You can just say, I don't care. You can pull out whatever climate change you want to do. I don't care. I'm not going to do this myself. I myself will not be taking any carbon and putting it back in the atmosphere. Okay? So, in summary, we need to stop making thermodynamic whoopee like right now, or we're gonna die. Like a lot of people are gonna die. The word climate refugee will enter the vocabulary of human existence. You will have no clue the amount of human displacement that will actually occur. No, nothing will be the same. Nothing at all. So we have to stop. Nuclear power needs to be a part of that equation. Solar, wind, nuclear, geothermal, everything. We have to do it all. We cannot ignore any options. We're out of time. If we had decided this 50 years ago, you might have just said, oh, maybe we'll just do everything geothermal instead of nuclear. Let's do some research into nuclear fusion. Let's get this done. We don't have that time. We have 12 years. Everybody panicked?
Yeah.
You should
They
be.
said the same thing in 2000. We have 10 years. Then they said the same thing in the 80s.
About the fact that we're now
We have
in
10 more years. We have
no,
10
no,
more
no.
years.
What, that's because we're constantly warning against something new. Okay, this specific IPCC report says if we want to keep climate change within 1.5 Celsius, period, we have to fix it within 12 years, or it's never going to happen.
So it's not really going to happen. It's not possible.
That's pretty much it. But we can make the old college try.
So you're saying the world ends in...
No. The world doesn't end.
No, I mean, we end in 3,000 something?
Yes, that's if we don't do anything.
Well, that's interesting, because that's only like another 1,000 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Pretty terrifying, right?
Do we have
Well, no, it's not realistic. I can't relate to it. But it is interesting. No, but it is interesting. If you think it's year 2000, we're a third.
Yeah, this is not good. This isn't good news, right? This is designed to terrify you. I do this to my students, and I terrify my students every year. This is one of my favorite problem sets to give them. Yeah.
Does the Earth have enough petroleum?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We can burn anything. We can burn everything. Not to worry.
In 1,000 years.
Probably. I mean, it comes back, right? The plants grow again, and so we can just keep burning it over and over and over and over again. So we can easily get to there. This is a very obviously pessimistic scenario on purpose, and this is to show you the worst possible case scenario. The worst case scenario is not like, well, maybe we'll just have less land mass. No, we're all going to die because we won't be able to breathe the air. We will die of asphyxiation because carbon dioxide will poison us all.
Hopefully by the year 3700, we can dig up the car.
All right. So anyway, I'm going to leave this up. Where is my? There we go. All right. You can stop emitting carbon right now, and I will take any other questions.
How about the new technology? It's almost like scrubbers. It scrubs the air.
Yeah.
It moves. Is that real? I mean, no one's going to stop doing what they do. It's not going to happen. Too many countries, too many people are done. But what is the real solution?
There is no real solution. I mean,
So we're just
a lot of the. So here's the thing. This 12-year number accounts for the fact that we're not doing this. This specifically. You can still keep things below 1.5 Celsius if we actually if we do very little and then start. I mean, like taking like the entire state of Nebraska, planting trees, and then burning them and capturing the carbon. Yeah.
Can I throw a bad vibe?
Please.
I'm reminded of the Fermi paradox.
Yes.
He asks, where are the aliens? Why
Yeah.
haven't we come into contact with them? And there was a scientist recently that said that the universe is littered with the rubble of dead civilizations.
Yeah.
Because we
Yeah.
reach a point where all civilizations reach a point where their energy use and resources destroy their ecosystem.
Very sobering and quite possible. it's not just our taste in music. I mean, our taste in music, it's actually pretty good. So it's really because it may be the case that they actually you just burn yourself to death slowly. Well, actually, on a geologic time scale, it's really fast, right? This thermodynamic whoopee is a couple of centuries, and we may just destroy life as we know it. But the bottom line is, there's still time. I mean, every single person here can reduce their CO2. What I will tell you is these budget and smart flex options, these are usually about 40% green energy. Already just by default, because that's what capitalism tells you to do. Maybe as high as 50 or 60. If you actually just select it, your electricity bill goes out to about 12%. And that's actually because this is a really popular option. This is in high demand. It's not really driven by the cost. This is driven because people just want to do the right thing. You can be part of that solution. Thank you. Let me leave up the, if you haven't gotten this, there you go.